Greetings to everyone, friends. The Ukrainian information space and basically the global information space has actively started to split into two categories. The first one says that the war will end very soon, everything will pass. By the end of 2025 or the beginning of 2026, Russia will already be out of strength, or soon Europe and Trump will finally grab Putin by the balls, and so on. The other side, however, paints a sad scenario both for Ukraine, for Ukrainian cities, and in general for Europe. Perhaps that's why Europe is actively preparing for war and is less and less willing to give Ukraine its own stockpiles of weapons, because they understand that they also don't have as many weapons as they would like to have. And that's why they are now actively trying to fix this situation. We'll now look at both sides of the same coin. The first one is that the war will end soon and that Ukraine will win. The second is essentially the World War III, which people also discuss actively. And we'll start with a big speech from Maria Berlinska, Ukrainian activist who often comes up with different scenarios, and this time she's presenting a very, very negative scenario. The front is rapidly advancing toward Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro, and other cities bursting at the seams. Russian infantry is breaking through our thinned-out lines. They're penetrating deep into the rear for dozens of kilometers. She said thinned out because sometimes we have only 4 or 7 infantrymen per kilometer of the front. Can one person control 150 to 200 meters of the front? Of course not, that's impossible. When the Russians sneak in behind us in small groups, they stay, build up, and then attack. The kill zone from drones ranges from 30 to 35 kilometers. But for some reason, there is little news about all this. If you want to see it with your own eyes, just watch Deep State in Dynamics over a few months. And basically those who watch Deep State, those who follow it, already know how the situation is developing there. They know that the Russians are creeping forward slowly, but are still constantly capturing some new territories, despite those isolated cases when the armed forces of Ukraine report that some villages and some individual settlements have been cleared. It immediately becomes obvious how quickly the Russians are advancing. Our forces are holding the front with all their strength, relying on morale and willpower, but the Russians have greater numbers. For every dollar we invest in drones, they counter with $50 to $70. Can you imagine 50 to 70 times more? They outnumber our infantry 5 to 7 times. We're critically short on personnel. The Russians are moving forward slowly, heavily, with setbacks and huge losses, but every day they keep advancing. Please support our army continuously to avoid losing Pokrovsk, Pavlohrad, Vilnyansk, Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro, Sumy, and Kharkiv. If we relax the way we tend to, we could easily lose these cities. That's how it is. Disturbing analysis from Maria Berlinska. And all of this is finished off by the deputy chairman of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on National Security, Cherniv. Let's listen to him, because this story concerns not only Ukraine, but all of Europe.
The Russian military-industrial complex is working at full capacity today and is producing more for storage. That is, the armored vehicles being produced today, the tanks being produced, they are going into storage because right now they are not effective in the war that the Russian Federation is waging against Ukraine, since at the moment this is a drone war. But our partners do not have such experience yet, and European countries as well as NATO countries do not have experience in waging drone warfare. That's why a conditional breakthrough is possible there, formed by equipment or tanks, the same way it happened in the classic wars of the 20th century.
Can you imagine the Russians now? Well, what we're told is that the Russians are about to run out of money, that their economy is about to collapse and so on, but it turns out they're stockpiling different types of weapons in warehouses for a possible new breakthrough. Just imagine this whole story. So in the information space, there's a clear idea that the Russians are spending all their resources on the war in Ukraine. And because of this, as skeptics say when talking about the possibility of war in Europe, they say they can't even handle Ukraine. So if they don't have the resources to fight in Ukraine, then how would they attack Europe? But here we see that Our official Ukrainian authorities, their representatives, are saying that the Russians are stockpiling in their warehouses. Other sources also say that the Russians are building up their manpower, meaning they are recruiting, not mobilizing, but specifically recruiting people into their ranks on contracts for big money. They're gathering people, building up an army. For what purpose? That's the question. Still an open question, right? So what could all this mean? All this can only mean that European intelligence hasn't lost its mind when they say that Russia might be preparing an attack on European countries. Maybe not now, maybe not in year 26, maybe in 2027, 28, 29, and so on. As they say, by 2030. So they will be fully ready to fight against NATO in Europe. Here's the question: what will happen? If the Russians, for example, don't choose to attack Europe because, say, they fail to capture Ukraine, what will happen if they direct all these forces once again at Ukraine? Through Belarus as well, for example, they will also deploy these troops and use these resources. How is this supposed to continue? How is this supposed to end? Write your opinions in the comments. That was the first scenario, that the war won't end anytime soon. That's essentially what many Ukrainian soldiers are saying, and nobody really wants to hear their opinion there, because nobody wants to believe in something bad. But there is also a good scenario. Let's listen now. Chief Rabbi of the city of Dnipro, Mr. Kamenetsky. Let's listen to him, because he actually gives a positive scenario for how things could develop.
As one of us said, the war will end in 2 months. I'm ready to argue about that. And if the war ends before January 15th, we'll meet here on the Great Lekhanim deal. That's with God's help.
Excuse me, let me clarify. January 15th, year 2026, right?
Yes.
Year 2026, right?
We added extra time since people will be busy on New Year's. So we'll celebrate on January 15th. That will be after the war is over. As soon as the war is over, the whole world, the good kind, in the best sense of the word, investors, tourists, everyone will come here. And there will be a great life here, and it will start right in 2026. I'm telling you this not as a prophet or rabbi. This is also the opinion of great people in America and Europe who understand this topic. This is not a dream, not a fantasy, not a prayer. This will happen very soon. Because Russia will become not South, but North Korea, and Ukraine has a great future ahead, an extraordinary future.
That's the opinion. And honestly, I wish it would turn out that way. Because, of course, after so many years of horrors that Ukraine and the Ukrainian people have gone through, I would really like to see such a positive scenario begin. And even in such a positive scenario, even if it happens, and I really, really hope it does, we understand that for millions of Ukrainians, for Ukrainian families, there will be no happy ending, and there simply can't be. Because too many people have been lost in this war. But this idea exists, and let's try to think more positively. Maybe this option, it might suit us better. What do you think about this? Write in the comments. It will be very interesting to read your opinion, friends. Have a great day. See you next time.